Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Kat West. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Psychology at Winthrop University. And in this video, I'm going to discuss with you my journey in education and how I got to be where I am, which is working with you and teaching in this department. So I earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Clemson University. I went straight from my undergraduate experience into a graduate experience where I earned a PhD in neuroscience from the Medical University down in Charleston, South Carolina. The picture that you see here is quite a bit a while ago, so this is a more recent picture of me. But I actually went and did some digging, and I did actually find a picture of right when I graduated from Clemson University. So there are technically all of my images there of little baby me all the way to where I am today. But another exciting part of my academic journey that I will be discussing a little bit more in detail at the end, because I'm mostly going to focus on my neuroscience degree for this talk, is that as of May 2023, I am going to be adding a third degree. I am currently working on a master's in education in clinical mental health, and I'm doing that at Winthrop while I'm teaching, and I am going to also be a licensed therapist in the state of South Carolina, or a licensed counselor in the state of South Carolina. But again, most of this presentation is going to be about my bachelor's degree in psychology and my PhD in neuroscience and what exactly that means. But I also want to talk again about not just what neuroscience is, but my journey itself. So a little bit more about my undergraduate education. As I told you, I went to Clemson University. I didn't start out as a psych major. I actually started out as an elementary education major. I actually switched to psychology after my first year in college, and I love to tell people that story only because it is possible to change degrees, it is possible to change majors and still graduate on time. What's really important is listening to yourself, listening to your experiences and doing experiences to make sure that what you're doing and what you're learning is going to be the right fit for you career-wise. So one of the things that you will notice is that, and I have circled it here, I am from Rock Hill and I went to Clemson. So pretty much from the time I was born until the time I went to college, I had experienced exactly this much of the United States. And again, I told you I went to the Medical University. Well, that's down here. So I really didn't get a whole lot more of the United States, even in my graduate experience. But let's back up a minute. Let's go back to what I was talking about with being at Clemson. So one of the things that I did or had to do my very first semester at Clemson as an elementary education major was go into a classroom and get some hands-on experience. And I'm so thankful that I did, because I very quickly realized that it wasn't necessarily the children or even teaching or the profession, because I loved that. I didn't like having to interact basically with the administration and teach children a certain way. For example, I was tutoring these two boys, and I knew for a fact that they just did not have resources at home. They weren't going to go home to a supportive family. They probably weren't even going to go home to any adults at all. They definitely weren't going to go home and have a lot of food. They definitely weren't going to go home and have a lot of resources. And yet the state expected them to learn and to be judged by the exact same standards that a child whose family did have a ton of money and who did have a lot of adults to interact with and guide them would be. And that was just so unfair in my mind, but I didn't necessarily know a solution. And I just knew that I would be frustrated. And so again, I was very glad that I got that experience, because I realized this isn't going to be the most effective way for me to do what I want to do. So again, switched to psychology after my first year. I did minor in something, though I minored in English, which was random, but that's just because I love to read books. And I thought, hey, that's easy enough for me. I would have technically minored in statistics, but Clemson didn't have a statistics minor. They only had a calculus minor. That's a different story for a different day. But nonetheless, this is really where I wish I had had some advising, but I'll come back to that as well. So let's talk a little bit more about things that I did well during my time as an undergraduate. So I did have a really good GPA. So I did take classes that I enjoyed. I did take my studying seriously. I did set up a really good schedule, even though it was weird compared to like adult standards. I did have a very routine kind of schedule where I studied at certain times and I had fun at certain times. And I played ultimate frisbee at certain times, so I had things that I did so that I could earn a good GPA. I did get a fairly good GRE score. I tried to translate, because again, I'm 1,500 years old, but I tried to translate it to what the types of GRE scores would be now. And I think it comes out to something about a 315. Again, the number isn't so much important. Just go with, I had a fairly decent, it wasn't the highest, but it was a decent GRE score. Another thing that I did well is that I completed an undergraduate honors thesis. So if you have a chance to do an undergraduate honors thesis, you absolutely should. But really what a lot of people said was impressive really wasn't as much the thesis as it was the research that went with it. And that is one of the things that I love about our department here at Winthrop University, is that we allow all students, not just our honor students, to conduct actual research. So when you take Psych 302, you are actually going to do a research project and you will be able to say, I have done research. Now, some of you may get opportunities to do more than just that basic experience, but you will at least be able to say you have it. And that is such an important thing that we try to make sure that you guys have. Along with that, I didn't just do research for my undergraduate honors thesis, which was pretty actually already sort of neuroscience in kind of its feel. I was looking at sort of different kind of taste sensitivity in different kinds of people. But I also got sort of a part-time research gig working over in the biology department. And so I got to handle some laboratory animals. Now I wasn't doing a lot of like heavy research with them. Mostly what I was just doing was cleaning the animal cages and weighing them and some basic things like that. But that was also really important, again, for my future career in neuroscience, because I could actually say that I had handled the lab animals. And I worked as a teaching assistant in the math department, and I mentored student athletes. So again, I kind of showed that I had sort of an academic ability, but I also had the ability to sort of mentor. And both of those qualities I sort of highlighted in my kind of discussion for graduate school, saying, look, I'm a mature student. I can handle the research rigor. I can handle the class rigor, but I can also interact with others, and I can teach them what I know, and I can communicate what I have learned, which is really what I was trying to highlight with some of these last experiences as far as my graduate career goes. So I had this great experience in Clemson. I was all ready to go, and here I was graduating. So got myself ready to go, found my neuroscience programs that I was interested in, and I applied to them. I applied to 6 different programs. So again, to give you a rough idea of what I did, again, if you keep in mind too, these each cost money every time you have to apply. And I waited and I waited and I waited to see, what I would hear from the graduate schools. And eventually I started getting some letters back, and I heard from the University of Connecticut and I got rejected. Then I heard from the University of Pennsylvania and I also got rejected. Heard from Penn State, got rejected. Heard from the University of Washington, got rejected. Heard from Duke. Technically didn't exactly get rejected. They at least interviewed me, but the person that I wanted to work with was going to retire and wasn't going to be there long enough for me to finish my PhD. So as a result, got rejected. And then came down to MUSC. And weirdly enough, I got rejected. And so some of you may be thinking, wait, hold up. But yeah, I got all rejections. Yeah. So that's another lesson that I learned, and that's really important. And for those of you that are seriously considering graduate school, that's a reality. And that's one of the things that you have to think about. But even though I got all rejections, I still had made one of the best decisions of my life. And that's what I want to talk to you about here. This particular person, his name is Dr. Chandler. And he was a researcher at the Medical University of South Carolina, which was sort of where I was leaning towards anyway. It was sort of kind of a tie between Duke and MUSC as my 2 choices. And I just told you that the person that I wanted to work with at Duke wasn't going to be there long enough, which is why I ended up getting rejected from Duke. But I had been talking to this person, Dr. Chandler, at the Medical University, and Again, I had graduated in May. Graduate school wasn't going to start until August. And I knew I was tired of living in Rock Hill. But remember, I'm still living in this little bubble, right? So I expanded my bubble just enough to cover Charleston. And I went ahead and moved down to Charleston. And I started volunteering in Dr. Chandler's lab just to get more research experience. And so when I got my rejection letter, I was very confused because I was already down there. And I was thinking, well, all right, no big deal. I'm pretty young, straight out of undergrad. I'll keep doing what I'm doing here. Maybe even I can get a job at Dr. Chandler's lab, even part-time or something, and actually turn this into a job versus just volunteering. And I can, keep doing the other stuff I was doing on the side to make money. And then I'll try again. Or, maybe I can take another class or two and I'll try again. I'll try to apply again. And it was just funny because the timing of it, Dr. Chandler was on vacation or at a conference or something when I got my rejection letter. And so he gets back and I was talking to him about it. And I was talking to him just under the premise of, what kinds of things do you think I could do to be more competitive? Do you think I should take this class or do you think I should do that? And he goes, what do you mean you got rejected? And I was like, I don't know how to explain it. I got rejected. And now this does not usually happen. And this is where I'm very lucky. And I know that, but he actually went and got the school to overturn the rejection decision, interview me, and then they accepted me. And basically I got accepted partially into his lab. And I was also at the time sort of working with someone else by that point. So yes, even though I got all rejection letters, because I had decided to go ahead and get involved with the thing I wanted to do. I was already in the lab volunteering. I was already working towards the stuff that I wanted to do. I had made myself more competitive. I had made myself there, and I had made myself demonstrate basically that yes, I could do it, and I was serious about doing it, and I wanted to do it, and I was very interested in the research. So let's sort of go back to my list here. So again, I did a lot of things well, but the biggest thing that I did well was that I volunteered. And again, I waited really late to volunteer, right? You can start doing some levels of volunteering right now. And I mentioned that story about elementary ed because technically that was sort of like a volunteer experience, even though for me it was sort of built into the education curriculum. There are things that you can already be doing right now, early in your undergraduate career, trying out some parts and things that you think might end up being part of your job or part of your graduate experience someday so that you can already start to go, yep, liked that, nope, did not like that, and start to get a better sense of what you like, what you don't like, and to get yourself experience and things there so that people can see you, so that people notice you, that you've made yourself marketable, you've given yourself good skills, so that, for example, like in my case, somebody will look and go, yeah, that doesn't make sense. I'm not sure why you got rejected, and they will accept you in. Now, that doesn't mean that everything I did was great. There are a lot of things that I wish I could have done differently, and this I hinted at before. I wish I had had better advising when I was an undergraduate. You guys also get a second thing that I love about Winthrop University. You have access from day one to a faculty advisor. You get to talk to us as faculty members, and not just that you get to, we want you to. We want you to get to know us. That's why we're making videos. That's why all of your professors have said, sure, come talk to me, come see me. But that's one of the things that I didn't get a lot of, and I didn't do a very good job myself. I just didn't go and introduce myself, which I absolutely should have. But there are some things that I would have done differently, especially if I had had just a little bit of an advisor to sort of push me and give me a little bit of confidence. But the first one is that I wish I had studied abroad. I had wanted to do it. I had time to do it as far as like my schedule and my, classes and stuff in undergraduate, but I sort of chickened out at the last minute. I always tell everybody that the timing didn't work out, and I've made up this story over the years, probably to make myself feel better about it. But the reality of it is that I just flat out chickened out, basically. And I really wish I had studied abroad because I just think that would have not only given me good skills, but again, gotten me outside of that little bubble that I showed you on that one slide, which was pretty much my entire life experience up to that point. The other thing that I did is I missed a whole year. So I've told you this whole story about stuff. I actually graduated from college in 3 years, which is, again, why I'm saying I had plenty of time to have gone and studied abroad, but I didn't. And not that, you shouldn't graduate early. If you can graduate early, by all means, graduate early. But before you do that, have a discussion with an advisor, especially if you're thinking about a specific job or a specific graduate program, because there may be things that you can do during that extra time, even if it's not directly related to your undergraduate experience, that can make it easier. For example, there are several classes that I wish I had taken as an undergraduate during that extra year that would have made my graduate life a lot easier. So stuff like that. The other thing is related to that, I wish I had double majored. I ended up taking a lot of biology and a lot of chemistry because of the neuroscience major. And I wish I had just gone ahead and just finished and gotten a double major. I might have even been able to do it with math, but either way, I should have just taken the time that I had and made myself more marketable that way as well. I also should have spent more time researching the graduate programs. I pretty much relied on my undergraduate mentor who helped me with my undergraduate thesis. And he basically said, hey, these are some good people that do some good work. You should apply to these schools. And with the exception of Duke and MUSC, I just applied to all the other schools because that's what the mentor had said to do. And I knew basically nothing. So in some ways, I'm kind of glad I didn't get accepted to schools like the University of Connecticut because it turns out it's really cold up there, and I don't like cold. So that would not have been a good fit for me all the way around. But again, it's things like that. And then also, I wish I had spent more time researching jobs. Even when I finished my graduate degree, even when I was working on my graduate degree, I didn't even really know what I was going to do after that, right? Like, I kind of was like, okay, you go to undergraduate, and you go to graduate school. Like, that's about how much thought I put into it. And that's not nearly enough, right? The end story isn't the school. The end story is not even the degree. The end of the story is hopefully the job or the life situation that you want to be in after all of that. And the degree and the graduate school or whatever you do should just be the tools that you're getting along the way to get to that life situation. And so if I had spent more time looking at various jobs, I may have found that I didn't maybe even necessarily need a PhD. I could have just gotten a master's. Or I didn't necessarily need a PhD in neuroscience. I could have gotten a PhD in something different. So again, researching what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go would have been much more helpful. So I think it's really great. And one of the reasons why I love this class that you guys are in is because that's some of the things that you're going to start doing right now. And I highly encourage you to keep up with it. And again, ask your mentor, ask your advisor about it if you have any questions. It doesn't have to be a conversation you wait to have until your junior or senior year. Okay, so what have I done for my neuroscience stuff? Well, I've worked in a number of research labs. I told you I worked down at MUSC. So I worked in several different labs in the Center for Drug and Alcohol programs. Once I graduated, I also did what's called a postdoctoral fellowship in a different lab. That one was actually in the Department of Biochemistry. I worked in the Jackson Laboratory up in Maine, which is also super cold, but that's a different issue. And then something I always wanted to do, clearly, because I started off as an elementary ed major, but I've always wanted to teach, so I never really let that part go. I just kind of switched from elementary ed to higher ed. So while I was in graduate school, I started teaching at the College of Charleston. I did actually move to Maine for a year. That's where that Jackson Laboratory comes in. But because of that, that's also where some of these others come from. So I taught at the University of Maine, Eastern Maine Community College, this other place up in Maine. It was like an adult education facility. I moved home eventually here to Rock Hill. And at one point, I was actually working at Winthrop and UNC Charlotte together at the same time. I was actually teaching almost like 8 classes a semester. It was kind of crazy. Then UNC Charlotte offered me a full-time position first, but I never gave up on Winthrop, and they finally had a position open, and I was finally offered a full-time position. So here I am, yay, finally at Winthrop, full-time, and I couldn't be happier. But another thing that people always say is, I mean, gosh, Dr. West, that seems like a really long journey just to have finally ended up back here at Winthrop, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but totally worth it. I'm so excited. And they're like, yeah, it's true, it's true. But PhD, right? You make a ton of money. And I'm like, well, maybe. But I just want to go ahead and put this out there in case nobody else has said it to you yet. If you're thinking about going to graduate school just because you want to earn more money, you might want to rethink that. Sometimes that's absolutely how it works. You go to graduate school, you get paid more. But that shouldn't be the only reason why you go to graduate school, because there are some situations where that's absolutely not the case. And so let me show you what this graph is about here. So what I've done here is I took just the average Winthrop professor salary. I just kind of Googled it and got, it was based on some data from the state of South Carolina. So take this for what it's worth, but this is, the average professor salary here at Winthrop. That's what you show in this first bar here. But then the orange line is how much school are you going to need post-graduation, and that's from your undergraduate. So for an average Winthrop professor, they're going to need at least another 4 years, because most of us have our PhDs after undergraduate, and some of us even more than that. Like mine was 5 years and then a 6th year as a postdoc, so my orange line would actually be up here, okay? The other 3 are actual people that I know that also got undergraduate psychology degrees, right? And this is how much money they earn. First one is my sister-in-law. She works in an investment firm. She has exactly 0 years after her undergraduate degree, so she has just her bachelor's degree, and you can see she makes about what the average Winthrop professor makes, and she did not have all that extra school. All right. Another friend of mine sells real estate in the Charlotte area. And this was, again, probably an underestimate of what they make, but this is at least the minimum of what they make, at least the last several years, because the housing market has been so good. And again, they've had about 1 year of education post their bachelor's degree in psychology. And that was just specific to real estate training. And the company paid for it, so they didn't even have to pay for it. That was the other cool thing about what they do. So yeah, clearly I'm not doing something right here, because I have a lot more schooling and not a lot more money. Definitely not more money. Yeah. And then I have another friend that owns a catering company. Now again, the company is quite a number of years old, has definitely built itself up, and it's pretty popular. And he did some very good things once COVID hit and was able to even make the business even more successful. But the man makes a ton of money, and so do his siblings. There's 3 of them that own it together, and yeah, they make just a ton of money. And again, psychology degree, but no additional experience. They just have the bachelor's degree. So again, if money is your goal, right, don't just automatically think graduate school. Right? Look around. A psychology degree sets you up for a ton of different kinds of jobs, all that are still going to use your psychology skills, right? But again, it's going to end up in a very different outcome. I chose the job that I chose, again, not necessarily because of the money, although I appreciate the money that I make. Again, it's more the experience. I'm doing the thing that I love with teaching and working in research. All right, so now let's jump in. Last couple minutes here. What exactly is neuroscience? Well, neuroscience is just simply the scientific study of the nervous system itself. And so we study things like the brain, the entire nervous system, various diseases that might affect the brain and the nervous system. So this is the APA's website, and it discusses here the different divisions of the American Psychological Association. That's what the APA is. And if you have never come to their website, you absolutely should, because they have some really good information here about education and different things. They also have graduate school information. They've got just a ton of information here. But one of the things that I wanted to show you is where neuroscience sort of falls within how the APA even divides itself. And it's actually in a number of different places. So there's actually a whole society for neuroscience and comparative psychology. There is a society for clinical neuropsychology, so neuropsychology, neuroscience, biological psychology. A lot of those are going to be very similar in sort of their theme. But again, if you've never looked at some of the information, again, that's here, within the divisions of APA, or even, again, like I said, within the education parts of APA, you definitely should check out their website. They have a lot of really good information. All right, back over to my stuff. So neuroscientists are going to study a lot of different things because we kind of bridge a lot of different parts of psychology. We look, again, overall at brain and behavior interaction, or brain and body interaction. So what's going on in the brain or in the nervous system when this thing is happening in the body, or when this thing is going on with the person. So we might study big topics like addiction, aging, what's considered normal versus what's considered abnormal as far as brain functioning goes. We study various memory processes and what's happening in the brain and the body during that. We would look at things like medication, stress, health, various things on brain functioning. So again, we have topics that are related to neurology, which is more of the medical side of things. So we would look at stroke, injury, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, all kinds of stuff. We might look at issues that are related to criminal justice. So we might look at things like, is a person competent to stand trial, and what does that even mean? And we would look at, what happens if there's some sort of injury or whatever, and does that make a person more or less competent to stand trial, or unable to defend themselves, or something like that? Or is there a way to know when a person's lying? We look at issues related to the military. So again, if you're even interested in anything like that, there's probably going to be somebody studying something related to how the brain is functioning during that particular thing. A lot of people confuse neuroscience with neurology. They are slightly different because it's a different degree. So neurology is a medical degree. You would earn an MD, which is a doctorate degree, a medical doctor. It would require 4 years of medical school. You would then have a residency where you would specifically specialize in neurology. You're probably going to make way more money, but you're going to have a lot more debt because you went to med school. But you would then do diagnosing and treating patients with various brain disorders like stroke, injury, cancer, and tumors of the nervous system, that sort of thing. So again, you're an actual doctor. Another one that gets confused a good bit in general with psychology is a psychiatrist. That's sort of the mix-up that gets here, right? Psychiatrist is more the medical doctor. In this case, neurologist is the medical doctor. The neuroscientist, on the other hand, has earned either a master's or a PhD in neuroscience. They have done anywhere from 2 to 6, maybe even a little bit more years in graduate school. Their salary is going to vary significantly depending on what they're doing. Are they doing research? Are they teaching? Where are they doing the research? Are they doing it for a school? Are they doing it for the government? Are they doing it for a private company? Again, that's why there's such kind of huge variability there in salary. The heavier you do on the research side, probably the more salary you're going to make. The more grants you write, the more salary you're going to make. The more teaching side you do, the less salary you're going to make. So again, that's sort of where that lies. But most of the time, most of neuroscience, at least PhDs, don't have any school debt, at least, because most neuroscience PhD programs are covered in one way or another, meaning that usually you're going to either work in a lab or teach or both. That covers sort of your debt for school. Now, that being said, that doesn't necessarily make that good. It just makes it less debt afterwards because, again, you are going to be super busy. But that is something to consider because you would definitely also be busy in med school. What does the neuroscientist actually do versus like the neurologist? Well, the neuroscientist is doing the research. They're the ones that are actually going in there and doing the studies and finding out what is actually happening in the brain, what is actually happening in the nervous system, so that when the neurologist is talking to a patient, that's how they've learned that. They've just read some new medical journal about this, that, and the other. Well, that's because the neuroscientist probably wrote it. The neuroscientists are also doing the teaching, sometimes even of the neurologists. And they also do a lot of consulting, both with the medical side of things as well as with other types of scientists that are doing research. For example, my postdoc experience, as I told you, was done actually in a biochemistry lab, but they wanted me to look at what was going on with their animals that they had done, since they brought me in, first of all, as a consultant before I ended up taking a full postdoc with them. So again, neuroscientists are brought in all the time, but we're doing a lot of what I call behind the scenes stuff. So all the stuff that you hear and that you know about the brain, somebody had to do that research kind of behind the scenes, and that's what's been done by neuroscientists. So if all this sounds interesting to you, what should you do with your time here at Winthrop? Well, some of it you got to do anyway, but I'm going to highly suggest that you take abnormal psych and biopsych as two of your kind of core classes. Everybody's got to take statistics and research methods as part of your psych degree here. But keep in mind when you do that, you can sort of have a neuroscience type flair to what you're doing and what you're interested in. But yeah, definitely want to make sure you take in the biological psych. That's the 345. You also want to go ahead and get yourself a little bit more biology. Biology would actually be a great minor or even a second major. So you're going to want to take the 150, 151, probably just for gen ed anyway if you haven't already. But then you might want to go on and take the human anatomy and physiology 1 and 2. And I may not have all of biology's numbers right, but the names are correct. And then some things that I highly recommend that will just make your life easier in graduate school that you should take either our 408 or 409 class, so the cognitive psych or principles of learning or even both. Developmental psych is also super helpful. And then a couple other biology classes. If you don't want to take all of those, you should at least take the genetics and the developmental biology, but cell biology and cell and molecular biology wouldn't hurt. And you definitely want to take organic chemistry. So yeah, most people at this point tell me that I'm crazy, but hey, at least the clothing is cool, right? This is my typical outfit when I used to work in the lab. This is pretty much how I looked most of the time I was there in the animal facilities. But really, yes, there's a lot of science to it. I mean, yes, there's a lot of heavy science as well, because you're bringing in a lot of chemistry and you're bringing in a lot of biology. But the types of experiments that we do, at least in my mind, are really, really interesting. I mean, we get to do things like, here, I'll show you a couple videos. We get to do things like this.
There's about 8 of us that train the rats, both staff members and museum volunteers. We love working with the rats and train them to play basketball. We train them, we use basically, it's a method of learning, it's called operant conditioning, which is basically learning due to the consequences of their actions. We just train the rats up in steps, and every single time the rat does a step correctly, like touch a ball, we'll reward them with a piece of food.
Okay, so we're here for the initial programming session. You got both sides of the brain put in, bilateral stimulators, and we're here for the initial programming session. This is what it looks like without the medicine and the stimulator. And now we're just going to turn it on. If I can get my fat fingers to hit the button, there we go. See how that feels. How you feel?
A lot better.
And actually in, let me show you some more stuff here. My actual graduate experience, you know, part of our whole facility, we made a bar. I mean, this was technically the research building, but we had a bar because, again, if you're going to study drug and alcohol addiction, which is one of the things that we were studying, you can't just give people alcohol, because what we have learned is that if they drink alcohol or if they use a drug in a different place from where they are used to having it, it can have different effects on the nervous system. And so we built a bar so they would feel more like they were in a bar drinking their alcohol, and we started getting more reliable data. I didn't just work with people, I also worked with mice. So I worked with these 2 mice the most as far as the alcohol research goes, because I was looking at a model of addiction as well as alcohol seizures, because if somebody has consumed alcohol for a long period of time and they want to go to rehab, one of the things you have to be concerned about is if they might have a seizure. So I was using these C57 black mice because they're very seizure resistant and they don't have very many seizures at all. And I was also comparing them to these other mice called DBA mice, and they are seizure prone, which means if you sneeze the wrong way on a random Tuesday in November, they're gonna have a seizure, and I'm not sure why. But again, purposely taking advantage of that to see how alcohol and being addicted to alcohol would cause differences in seizures. And we had this whole test, the way you could kind of screen to see if they were having an alcohol withdrawal seizure. So this mouse is not, this mouse is. And as you can see, his mouth is sort of open and his ears are kind of weird and his paws are kind of funny. And I know it looks blurry and people are always like, why didn't you get a better picture of that? Well, think about it. He's having a seizure. He's actively shaking. So it's really hard to get a kind of a still picture of what that looks like. But another thing I wanted to point out too, I told you I did worked in the lab at the Jackson Laboratory. Well, that's what this is. The Jackson Laboratory is known for housing and creating all of these different strains of mice, or at least many of the different strains of mice that are used in the research. And I actually got to go and work at that place. It was really, really cool. Some other things that I did is I asked the question of why adolescents binge drink alcohol. Well, you can't really give a bunch of alcohol to, human teenagers because, kind of illegal. So mouse parents don't tend to care. So I would take mouse teenagers, basically, and I would find out because they drink very similarly to human teenagers. They tend to drink a whole lot of alcohol all at one time. And so the predominant theory kind of outside the realm of neuroscience was just, well, these adolescents don't always get alcohol. So whenever they do, they just try to drink as much as they can. And, they're just being wild and they're being bad and blah, blah, blah. And I just didn't quite believe that. I just there's got to be more to it than that, right? Because even if you're drinking as much as you want, at some point you're going to kind of feel blah because you drank a lot of alcohol and you're going to stop. And so my thought was there's got to be something different about how they feel compared to an adult that keeps them from stopping drinking. And again, since a mouse can't tell you that they are drunk, I actually got to design and have created this thing. It's called a tea maze because it looks kind of like a tea here. You can see it's got one side that's dark and one side that's light, and we start them down here in this end of the tea. And we use the basic idea of operant conditioning, where we train them to go to one side if they're drunk, and we train them to go to the other side if they're not drunk. So basically, I give them the alcohol, the equivalent of either 1 shot or 2 shots of alcohol, right? And then I train them. So on the days that I give them the alcohol, they have to know to swim to one side. The days that I don't give them the alcohol, they have to go to the other side. And then what I do on the final day is that I give them small little bits, and I kind of increase over time that same day how much they have. So basically it's like starting off having a little bit, like a half a shot, and then eventually you'll have the equivalent of a whole shot, and the equivalent of 2 shots, and the equivalent of 3 shots, like you're drinking the alcohol. And what I'm looking for every time I put them in here is, let's say this is the sober side and this is the drunk side, is at first, because again, you just had a tiny bit of alcohol, all the animals should be going to the quote sober side, which tells me that, oh, we feel sober. And then at some point, the animal's going to start going over here, telling me, nope, I'm drunk, right? And that's what I wanted to know, is what dose of alcohol before the animals would start to go to the drunk side. And that's what this graph is showing you here. You can ignore all the math. We can talk about that later if you're super interested. But know that about every 0.4 equals, what for humans would be about 1 shot of alcohol. So 0.4 is 1 shot alcohol, 0.8 is about 2 shots alcohol, 1.2 would be about 3 shots of alcohol. And that's kind of what we found. So the first 2 groups are slightly different ways of running, but these are both adults. So this is adult mice take about 2 shots of alcohol before they start going to the drunk side, whereas adolescents take 3 shots of alcohol. So basically, it's got to be more alcohol in their system before it even kind of hits them and has them go, whoa, wait a minute, I'm drunk. I should stop drinking right now. And that's the part that some other people that have come behind me are now following up on, is sort of what is that? What is that effect? What's different about their brain that it takes more alcohol like that before that signal finally happens to say, whoa, maybe you should stop drinking now. Something else I did, and this was the stuff I did as a graduate student, I was sort of talking about this a little bit. I was brought in initially as a consultant, but then ended up working as a postdoc because the lab that I was working with and I was starting to consult with had created this mouse. You can tell him very easily because his fur is very brittle and tends to break off. But they had created this mouse because there was a family, actually a group of families in Israel that had a specific genetic mutation that messed up a gene called FA2H. You don't need to know any of that, but the long version of the story is it messed up the cerebellum in the family, which is this brain structure back here that should fill up this whole space, and it just did not. This family would end up having motor problems, and they would have all kinds of other issues. And so they had found what was causing it in this family was a specific genetic mutation. And so the lab, flash forward, had made a mouse with or just happened to actually already have a mouse with a very similar genetic mutation. So they adapted it a little so that it could be the exact genetic mutation. But then they didn't know what to do with it because they were a bunch of biochemists and they were like, all right, we got this mouse. We don't know what to do with him. And so they brought me in to help kind of figure out what had gone wrong with the mouse's nervous system and to see if it would be similar enough to the human patients that they could then use it to see if we could come up with some sort of treatment plan. So again, what happens and what we know and where I sort of came in is that that gene that they had messed up was actually a gene that makes a specific kind of fatty substance. And around each and every one of, or at least most of, your neurons that have these long axons that send the electrical message away is a substance called myelin or myelin sheath. And that is made from another kind of cell called a glial cell. But what we found is that that fatty substancey stuff that makes up the myelin gets disrupted in these mice. Right? And again, you can look at all the biochemistry that they found out, but essentially what we found is that this guy, and that's part of why his hair falls out, is apparently there's something similar in the structure of hair, fatty-wise, that makes their hair very brittle. But basically this guy's got messed up myelin, right? And so you can see here's two healthy, normal mice compared to this guy. So one of the things that I did is I just said, well, how much do they just kind of walk in general? Does he have disrupted just walking? And in general, it does seem that he has slightly disrupted walking. But this could just be like a fear thing, like maybe he's just kind of scared and more nervous as opposed to like unable to walk. So that's when I did this experiment. I put him onto this rod, and basically what happens is this rod spins and I can speed it up and speed it up. And I just wanted to see how long this guy could walk compared to the others. I will show you a video of it in just a second, but here's the actual data. So what you find is, again, the red, and all of these actually, represents this guy and all the others like him. The black in all of these represents the healthy mice without the genetic mutation. This is how fast it's going, so how fast it is in 40 miles or 40 revolutions per second is really fast. And this is how long they were able to stay on. So the very first day at a pretty slow speed, everybody is okay. They can walk on the bar pretty good. Speed it up to 8, already this guy's not doing so good. 16, he does terrible, and he does pretty terrible throughout. Whereas these guys, even on the first day, were doing okay, even up to pretty fast at 32 seconds. They didn't do so well at 40. But then just kind of like with any behavior, you practice it again the next day, they got better. And they got even really good on just the third day. Whereas this guy never really got better. All right, watch here in the video. What you're seeing here in the video, it's not the first day. This is more like day 6 or 7 by the time I got around to making the video. All right, and as I predicted, yeah, they have messed up myelin. So this is the overall brain structure. You can't really tell from that picture, but if you look at the blue ones here, this light blue is where you would find the fatty substance or the myelin. And what you can see is in the healthy animal, lots of light blue. And that one that kept falling off, it's just not there. The myelin is just not there. And so then we asked, well, is it just that the myelin's not there, or is it that the whole cell is not there? Because what we also found is that these are the big cell bodies that would then be sending their axons into the middle here. They're gone too. So what we don't know is what happens first. Does the cell die, and so the myelin that would have been on the axon also goes away? Or do these cells just never form, and so they never formed an axon, and then that axon never got covered in myelin? And we do not know the answer to that. So some of the things that they were following up on after I left was some various diets where they were trying to supplement some of the fatty substances to try to improve the behavior and the health of these animals. They did find something that worked eventually, and I think they were still trying to coordinate with the families over in Israel. But again, a lot of different kinds of projects that I can do. So again, I worked with an alcohol lab. Again, I worked in this project, this is closest to a disorder called leukodystrophy, which is sort of like multiple sclerosis in a way. So again, a very different kind of thing altogether compared to addiction. So again, neuroscience is a really neat thing, and it has very real implications for very real people. So usually at this point when I'm talking about what I do, most people go, okay, great. So you have no life, Dr. West. And I'm like, well, no, I absolutely do have a life. In fact, I have 2 stepdaughters and a daughter. If any of you have ever taken developmental psychology with me, you know that this picture is actually a little bit old. It's just one of my favorites because it's one of the ones where I actually have all 3 of them together. But this young little girl here just hit the 2nd grade. And I'm not quite sure how that happened. But yeah, so she has been a joy and a pleasure to watch. I just have to keep up with the fact that she steals all my chapstick. I literally found these all in her room once when I couldn't figure out why my chapstick kept disappearing. So yeah, found out the reason where that's going. To add to the fun from this photo, I actually now also have 2 stepsons-in-law. So my one stepdaughter got married this past year, and then 2 years ago, my other stepdaughter had gotten married, and then in January, my first stepdaughter here is gonna have a baby. So I am going to be a grandma. So I'm very excited about that. So yes, I absolutely do have a life outside the lab and outside the classroom. Beyond that, if you know me and you've been in my classes at all, you also know that these are also my newest children, I guess you could say. They were supposed to just be a learning project, and now they've definitely just become my pets. This is Sweetie here. She will also let me put costumes on her. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun raising chickens. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I do. I'm definitely not always studying. I'm definitely not always working in a lab. I have found a good home life balance. And if that is something you would struggle with, that's definitely something you would want to talk to your mentor about. So what do I normally teach here at Winthrop? Well, I generally teach things like general psych. I teach a lot of developmental psych. That's one of my favorites. I've been recently teaching a lot of social psych, which is also fun. But recently for developmental psych, I tried to look up eagles, since we're the Winthrop Eagles. And of course, the internet did not disappoint. I was able to get the life cycle of an eagle in cartoon form. But I was sort of disappointed because I was like, well, it neglects the fact that there should be an elderly eagle. And so I Googled that. And again, the internet did not disappoint. Now, these are not kind of the same quality of animation, but yeah, loved that. Also at Winthrop, I have taught several other things before. I've taught 198 and 305. I've worked with several students on their honors thesis research. I've taught ACAD before, which I absolutely love teaching. So that's the majority of my story with neuroscience. Thank you for taking the time to listen. As I said before, I am an assistant professor of psychology here at Winthrop. I have previously been a lecturer and undergraduate coordinator at UNC Charlotte, and I am currently working on a master's in education to become a licensed professional counselor. And even though I didn't spend a lot of time talking about that in this talk, I did want to leave you kind of with one final thought that's sort of related to both that and my neuroscience degrees. And that's just that I hope that you never stop learning. Again, I am back in school. I am earning a new degree even after earning a PhD. And a lot of people have sort of asked me, why would you do that? And I say, well, first of all, again, I love learning, and I think you should always try to be learning. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal program, but I'm still sort of doing the same thing when I really look at it. I mean, I'm looking at various mental health issues, again, things like addiction, depression, anxiety, trauma. And what I did before with my neuroscience degree was just sort of look at these issues, kind of from the perspective of what's going on in the brain, what's going on in the nervous system during these events or that causes these events. And really all that's different now, at least in my mind, is that I'm just sort of adding some new skills to help me understand these issues, sort of looking at them from the perspective of what's going on in the heart. So I think hopefully one day when I do see clients that I'll sort of have a different perspective. I'll be able to sort of look at these issues through several lenses, again, with my clients, as well as when I'm talking and teaching in the classroom. I'll sort of be able to bring several different things to my students and to you guys as hopefully future students in my classes. Again, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have any questions about anything that I have talked about, or if you'd like more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. Talk to you soon. Bye.